Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Wellness Wednesday. I am so pumped about today, and many of you know the reason why, and that's because I am joined by a good friend and somebody who has taught me a lot and continues to teach me a lot, and is one of my favorite people to call and riff on ideas and things. And so we're joined today by the great Kate Simon, who is the head of coach development at Glover U. And so, Kate, thank you for being here today. I'm so excited to talk with you.
Thanks, Jordan. I can't wait.
Good. All right. Well, let's jump right in. Number one, today, Kate, we're talking about authentic goals, and you and I can talk about virtually any topic. There were a lot of topics that we tossed around, and this was the one that we landed on. I think it's especially relevant because of the time of year we're in. And what I'm curious about is, what is the difference in your mind between an authentic goal and an unauthentic goal?
So, when I think about an agent or a client who is setting an authentic goal versus an inauthentic goal, there's a couple things that I look for when we ask about. So, an authentic goal is something that is just about you and your values, who you are as an individual. And in some cases, not always, but it might not even really make sense to somebody else. Meaning, if you achieve this goal at the end of a year or a given period of time, it might not look impressive to somebody else. Now, in some cases, it could, right? But that's not the cornerstone of this goal.
Mm-hmm.
So, an inauthentic goal, which is a little bit easier to recognize than an authentic one, but an inauthentic goal is something that in your mind, you tell yourself a story about what somebody else is going to see, recognize, or a conversation or a moment that's going to happen on the other side of this goal that's not just about you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the inauthentic goal, it seems like, is more of an external thing, where an authentic goal is more internal.
Correct. And so one of the ways in which I will ask around this is okay, if this is my goal, right? Like I want to take myself to the moment I actually achieve this goal, right? Like I did the work, I sold all the houses, I'm now, whatever, I've achieved this level of success. What am I envisioning? Am I envisioning me sharing a photo with this person online? Am I envisioning receiving this award at a sales meeting? Am I envisioning this one person in my world, in my life, that now recognizes me as somebody who's worthy because of this? Or is this still important to me if none of those things happened? If the goal is still important to me, if I could never post about it on social media, I could never talk about it, nobody ever said good job, but I was the only beneficiary and witness to this goal, would it still be important to me? And if the answer is yes to that, that's how I know that this is an authentic goal.
Do you all see why I invited her here today? I mean, that's so good. And, one of the things, as you know, Kate, as coaches, one of the power tools that we use to mine the wisdom of people's heads and hearts is questions, right? And that's one of the things that, when you were talking, I wrote down a question, which is, what do you envision at the conclusion of this goal? What do
What's
you
different about
envision?
your life? What?
Yeah, what's different about your life? Okay. And what you're saying is inauthentic goals. Is, if you're envisioning, it seems like your vision for the conclusion of that goal is the approval of other people, and not just a feeling, an experience, that deep sense of fulfillment or whatever it is that you're after. Then that's a time that maybe we should be analyzing that goal. Is that right? And thinking about, through the lens of, is this actually authentic to me and specifically my values? Is that correct?
Correct. And I think it can get confusing and messy in the sense where if we want to be spiritual beings, right? Like we were just talking before we went live on Dr. David Hawkins. It's like you could be a spiritual being and then like lose any and all structure to your life. And it's my belief that there is a very important role for ego, right? Like ego is, we talk about ego in the sense of like, hey, I'm better than everybody, but ego is actually like our individual identity and our purpose in our life. And it's not wrong to have ego. In fact, there's not a world where we don't have ego. It's just keeping it in check to the healthy place where we're not making all of our decisions from it. And so what I mean by that, Jordan, is it's okay to want to achieve something. And the side story here is other people see you, recognize what you're doing. Like there is nothing wrong about getting recognition, right? But if that's the only driving force, this is where we start to make decisions that are out of alignment with who we really are and what our true values are.
Okay. And I know you touched on this, Kate, and yet I really want to drive this point home. So what's the stress test you would use with someone in a coaching conversation to make sure that this is an authentic versus an inauthentic goal?
So when I'm looking for authenticity in a goal, the precursor there, and again, we're not going to necessarily have time to go over this today, but I want to understand what their values are as a person, right? If success and recognition is a top value, while I might have some concerns about that being a top value, their goals of being on stage might actually be authentic to that value, right? So when I'm stress testing a goal, I'm typically stress testing it against what their core values are. So for instance, very common one, especially if you have a spouse and have children, is that somewhere in your values are going to be family, right? Now, it's very important that before we decide that family is a value, or I should say right after we decide family is value, it's important to understand what specifically that looks like for us. So, right, I'm a mom of 2 toddlers. Family for me means being present, not working 60 hours a week, being there, like that is very specific to me. Whereas if I were to ask somebody else with empty nest or somebody else who's an empty nester, their value of family might mean financial support, paying for their kids' college. Therefore, they are working 60 hours a week. So it's important for us to understand the rules in which we're playing by with our value. And so a question I ask, if you know your values, would be, what does success in this value look like to me in this season of my life? So understand your values, ask that question, get clear on that definition. Now, this external goal we have, we stress test against that. So if my core value is family, and also it would be super cool to be on stage and get a selfie with Gary Keller, I have to ask myself what I'm willing to do and what sacrifices I may need to make for this value in order to make that happen.
Yep. Yep. And the thing that I've heard you say, and by the way, that question of essentially looking at goals through the lens of a season is something that's so important, especially because we as a society today have a dysfunctional relationship with time. And I believe that many people actually suffer from decision fatigue. They don't know that they're doing it. It's that you have too much choice. You suffer from problems of abundance more than you do from problems of scarcity. And without having some sort of ability to navigate that and make the right decision for you, it gets really hard because you can log jam yourself. You're trying to do too much in too short of a time. And one of the things that can be really helpful is that, especially when you're in the season, for example, of young children, you're looking at the goals and through the lens of what is important to me in this season. You can also use that as a way to kind of evaluate opportunities, right? And I've always loved the Richard Branson quote that opportunities are like buses, the next one will arrive very shortly. And you look at, like, there are parts of your life that have shelf life. Like business has shelf life, meaning it has staying power. It will be there for you. And yet children, for example, are things that their time sunsets, right? We have a limited time. And I'm really noticing this as my girls get older, right? I mean, Leah's 10 years old now. And so I think that we have to start incorporating the season into the goal conversation along with the values. But there's one thing in particular, Kate, that you say around social media that I just want everybody to hear as it relates to an authentic goal. What's that question you ask about social media? You hinted to it earlier, but I want to make sure everybody got it.
If at the end of this goal, if I couldn't tell anybody about it, if I couldn't post about it on social media, if I couldn't get attaboys, would I still want to do it? Right? Am I still passionate about climbing Mount Everest if I never got to talk about it? If would I still do an Ironman if I couldn't put that sticker on the back of my car so everybody knew how crazy it was? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
would I do it? And if the answer is yes, that's great.
Go for
If
it.
the answer is like, gosh, I really want to be known as an Ironman, but the sacrifices I need to make, I'm grumpy with my family, I'm missing my, daughter's ballet because I have to run 35 miles today. It's like, is that really the best goal for you right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because here's what happens if you're chasing a goal that's inauthentic to you, there's resentment built up. And you're actually doing your habit a disservice, and you convince yourself that setting goals is actually bad because you've created a toxic relationship with the goals that you've actually set for yourself, because they're not actually goals for your soul, they're goals for your ego.
Yeah. And I mean, what she just said, creating a toxic relationship. I mean, number one, I want everybody to really remember this and take this to heart. The purpose of goals is to create the best version of you. That is why you set goals. It's not what you get, it's who you become. And if your goals are not bringing out the best in you, meaning they're not pulling the gifts of you into the world, then as Kate mentioned, I would encourage you to put that under the microscope and ask the question, is this inauthentic? And the other thing that she just touched on is so key, because if I ask Kate, for example, how are your relationships? She's going to talk about Andrew. She's going to talk about her daughters, right? And yet, most of us don't think of how we relate to ideas and concepts the same way we relate to people. And so, when you think about a relationship, for example, a relationship is simply an energetic bond of connection, and it's intangible. You can't see it. If I ask Kate to FedEx me her relationship, she can't do that, right? It's an intangible force. And what's so interesting about that is we all have relationship statuses with our goals. It's like if you've ever filled out a social media profile and you click on that drop down and it's relationship status, it's going to have single, it's going to have I'm in a relationship, I'm married, it's complicated, long distance, right? And so we each have relationship statuses with our goals. And every one of us should be kind of looking at that like, is this an intimate, passionate relationship? Because here's the other thing that I've noticed, Kate, and maybe you have too in your coaching, is that how you relate to other people is typically indicative of how you're going to relate to your goal. And I had this one client, for example, it doesn't matter where they end up, they always seem to end up in some sort of relationship of abuse. And guess what? The goal is like this master that is constantly beating the shit out of them. And then they can't figure out why they can't get themselves to muster the strength and the energy, especially as they get older, to go chase it down, because it's this punitive master of their life. And I think is more or less a reflection of their what they're afraid that they're never going to be able to achieve. What insight would you add to that, Kate, to that idea?
What was crossing my mind as you were saying that is, and so, I'm in the world of Jeff Glover. If you guys don't know him, he's I don't know what to say. He's a production maniac, right? He's sacrificed his entire life to sell hundreds, if not thousands of houses. He's built a team around it. He's very focused, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very admirable trait because of his goals and of his vision. And it's very common that when we're talking to one-on-one coaching clients or anybody else in our world, their first instinct is, they'll tell me, I don't want to be Jeff Glover.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I don't want to sell 100 houses a year, because they have a belief in their mind, of what what sacrifices they would need to make in order to do that. But what that's really showing us is clarity around what they're willing to do and unwilling to do to hit their goals, right? And so whenever we feel this like energy around like, I could never, it's really an invitation for us to ask, okay, great, within the context of my goals, what could I do? What would I be willing to do? And then ask yourself what's holding you back from leaning in and owning that without shame, without, the words, Jordan and I were talking yesterday. Another, I would say, I know I'm bouncing around, another tall tale sign of an inauthentic goal is when the word should shows up in our dialogue about this goal. Well, I've been in real estate for 5 years and I've sold X amount of houses, so I should sell 100. Well, I don't have a wife, kids, family, so I should be doing more. According to who? And it's usually according to some external rule that's made up that we've bought into that's boxing us into chasing something to avoid the shame of not.
Yep. And then you're going to get into a fundamental issue, which is, and I say this to people all the time. Number one, you're never going to become a winner talking to yourself like a loser. It just won't happen. And number two, you can't guilt your way to gratitude. And what I mean by that, and we've all had this experience or we've seen it on television, right? We don't finish our plate and there are starving kids in Africa. And it's like somebody else's misery is not going to bring me to gratitude. Guilt does not lead to gratitude. And lastly, as she just mentioned, you can't shame your way to success.
Yeah.
Not real success, not authentic success. Now, what I've come to know in myself is that if I am on the path of shame and am able to get myself to take action because of shame, even when I achieve something, the process I had to go through makes the achievement feel like it wasn't worth it. Right. And so I think what you're really saying here, and this is a pillar, a cornerstone of my freed life, is this practice of metacognition. And that this is a practice that we as a society need to get really good at. And what Kate is illustrating to all of you is the practice of metacognition, because metacognition is simply the awareness and understanding of your thought processes. It's the awareness and understanding of your thought processes. And when you are aware of them and seeking understanding, then you're putting these shoulds underneath the laboratory of your mind, and you're saying, where did I even get this? Another one is uh, who is in the audience that I am auditioning for
Yes.
their approval? Who is in the audience that I am auditioning for their approval? And I think that when you think about inauthentic goals and Kate's first question of what do you envision at the conclusion of this goal? And if it's like, I'm on stage, this person finally recognizes and says that I did a great job, you are auditioning for their approval. And the challenge that you have is you're living inside of what's called a double assumption. The first assumption is that that they're even thinking of you, that they're thinking of you in the first place. The second assumption is you're trying to understand and read their mind, what the contents of their mind is about you. And I always kind of joke about this, right? Like, I have a hard time being around people who won't tell me what they're thinking, because if I start, if the tune in their head is country music and I start breakdancing, we're out of alignment, right? I have to be able to know what it is that they're authentically thinking. And so much of what you're saying here is simply the practice of analyzing awareness and understanding of your thought process, right?
Yeah. And I would even take that a step further, Jordan, and say, like, so what? What is the fear or the energy we have about not getting that approval from somebody? What meaning are we attaching to getting across the finish line and the person who we hope is sitting front row, whether it's on social media or not? Like, so what?
Yeah.
And really getting to the root of understanding why that's even a driving force to us can put the power back in us on what's actually important to us. Now, I just want to give like a side note. I see this all the time in some of our coaching clients where, and this is not like a new dynamic by any means, but you'll have a son, possibly, he's older, right? He's running the business, and it's a son of another realtor who is supposed to be in this business, and he wants to hit X goal so that in his parents' eyes, whether he's actually verbalized this or not, he is now worthy and he has now done X,
Yep.
right? And the saddest thing to witness as a coach is this person sacrificing what's important to them, sacrificing their health, becoming a crappy spouse, crappy dad. Their kids, don't even, have a good relationship with them. They hit this goal and they're holding this plastic trophy at some conference, and then they go home to their family that doesn't even like them.
Mm-hmm.
That is like the saddest thing as a coach to witness, is somebody misplacing their energy towards a goal and thoughts and beliefs that they actually have no control over, but more specifically, don't actually impact their life. We can't control what our spouse and kids think about us, but we can control how we show up to those, and that will impact our life, right?
Yep.
But whether or not an audience of 35,000 thinks we're cool or not, what is the actual impact on our life when this happens?
Yeah. And see, that person, for example, is caught up in what I call worthiness worry. And worthiness worry is waste, because worthiness is like sleep. The more you try to focus on it, the more it's going to evade you. And this is kind of an extreme idea, but the way that I like to propose it to people is, imagine, all this, I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, blah, blah, blah. Well, number one, we always can take that conversation back to a question, which is, who is actually the appraiser of your worth? Who is that? Like, who's holding the report of your appraisal? Who has that? And you would eventually land on, well, no one. Okay, who's allowed to write on that report? Who is it that you would give the editing power of your appraisal report? Well, I wouldn't give it to anyone. Would you teach a kid? Would you teach a kid that they should allow anyone else to write on their report? Would you ever do that? No. Well, why not? Because what you're going to ultimately land on is that you are the appraiser of your own worth, and that this whole thing is just a subjective reality that you're looking at through the lens of your own perception. And you've never been taught to question what is creating the perception in the first place. What is the program that's running this entire thing in the first place? And the other idea that I've taken into coaching conversations is, all right, look, we've had this conversation 3, 4, 5 times about your obsessive worry over worthiness. So let's just say that you got a text message from God the second that we ended this call, and he said, look, I'm sorry, but you're just one of the people that I built without worthiness. You'll never get it. You'll never have it. You're one of the people that I just decided you don't get to have it. Well, what now? What are you going to do now? Because you can't worry about it anymore. You can't pursue it anymore because God just told you can never get it. And it's interesting, if you can allow the fear of that conversation to wash through you and process it. If you can process that, what you're going to end up with is, I am actually caught up in worthiness worry, and it is wasting my time. And because most of what you care about in that space doesn't matter, right? So
Yeah.
I know that that was a rant from all rants. My soapbox followed me in here today, Kate. It gets me sometimes. So parting thoughts, Kate, ideas that you would encourage or want the audience to take away with them today on authentic, inauthentic goals, anything that we've discussed today.
Yeah, a couple things, especially as we're sort of like getting into like goal setting season, and that would be, take a look at the goals you set for yourself in the last year or so. And I want you to get really specific, and just like you said, get deep in relationship with what those are, what roles they played in your life, what decisions you made or didn't make because of those goals, and how those decisions line up with who you are as a person and what your values are. Okay, so what we're doing is basically going backwards and appraising how well did I set goals that are authentic to me in the last 12 months? Or you started the year and you're like, hey, these feel authentic. But as the year went on, the sacrifices, the commitments, like it all was starting to feel out of alignment, right? And I want you to pay attention to what it felt like, what you noticed, and how you're starting to realize that it's not quite what you want.
Mm.
Then, as we look ahead to 2025, first, I'd like you guys to get clear on what your core values are. That's probably a different conversation, but really it's like these are the lens. This is the fiber of who you are and how you live, right? If you were a millionaire on the beach in Malibu or you lived under a bridge on Skid Row, what would still be true for you? Would family still be important, whether you had nothing to your bank account? Yes. Would spirituality still be important? Yes. Would help you, right? Like, find out what those values are, define the values. What does this value look like to me in this season of my life? A deeper question would be, at the end of 2025, if I'm winning with this value, what does it look like? At the end of 2025, if I'm winning with my family, what does my relationship with my husband look like? What does my relationship with my children look like? How do we spend our free time? What does this look like? And then when you're layering in the business goals, I want you to ask how it fuels your values before you recognize how it fuels your ego. Now, I want to be super clear here. There is no world where ego isn't present, and that's okay. But I want to make sure that this is not the leading factor, that your visions are leading, who you are as a person, and those intangibles are leading before ego. So that's what I would do. And then my additional challenge would be write your goals out and practice sitting with them for 30, 60 days. Tell your coach or an appropriate accountability partner if that's how you work, but there's no need to share it on social media, right? And if you notice this need to talk about it, stay curious about why.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And so it's a little bit of like, work in silence and see what's still exciting to you.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that that statement you made, like, to me, that's the cherry on the top. If you were a millionaire in Malibu or living under a bridge in Skid Row or on Skid Row, what would still be important or true for you, right? And the parting thought I would give everyone is that if your goals do not make you feel good, that to me should be the real litmus test. It should feel good. And I can't remember who it was, and we'll find the Mel Robbins podcast on this, and it was on manifestation. And the woman that was being interviewed said that you check all 3 points. It's your gut, it's your heart, and it's your head. And if you want to know that you're in alignment with those goals, that you're checking with your head, your heart, and your gut, and it checks all 3 boxes. So, Kate, this won't be the last time we have the opportunity to come on here and talk. And thank you so much for your time here today. Thank you so much for who you are and the work that you do in the world. I know that we're all better for it.
Always a pleasure to be a student of yours, and looking forward to our next conversation.
Yeah, me too. All right, everybody. So just so you know, next week we'll be back here. We're going to be going through the art of saying no, prioritizing your passion. So we will be back here with Wellness Wednesday next Wednesday, September 4th. And I hope that you will join us there. Thank you all for being here. Take what Kate shared with you today and go out and do your best to live freed. Thank you all. Bye-bye.